there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Market Monday on a Tuesday. I don't know, something's up. I'm having audio issues at the store. I can never figure these things out. The setup's the exact same, haven't changed a thing. And then you wake up one day, plug things in, and things don't work as usual. I'm getting a lot of pop in my audio setup at the store, so I'm going to have to debug that. So anyway, doing this at home, hopefully the audio quality is okay for this Market Monday. So this week I want to talk about kind of the market indicators as well as the aftermath of the Pro Tour, as well as, once again, Ultimate Masters and how that's going to affect the economy. So here is my overall judgment. So we'll get to the conclusion first, and then I'll go through the process of how I came to that conclusion. The conclusion is Magic is still relatively strong with the enfranchised player base, and there is some good indicators that there is growth in the player base. Apparently, Channel Fireball released a statement the Grand Prix are up by 10%. However, they are being selective with their data here and not admitting to the Grand Prix from the year before were significantly lower. So the good news is it at least is trending back up. Bad news is that, the powers that be are very dishonest with the overall state of Magic. I think that both Channel Fireball and Wizard of the Coast, they like to color the data, skew it towards of course, looking like it's stronger than it is. I mean, that's typical for companies, though. All right, so the good news is eventually we'll start to see the demand start to stretch to the current supply. The bad news is it's gonna take a long time to recover from the overabundance of products that were printed in 2018, and no sign that that is going to stop in 2019. I expect that we'll see Challenger decks again. Those are a product that I absolutely abhor. I think Challenger decks are the stupidest idea as far as lasting equity in the game, as it kills those current sets for years and years to come. So if Wizards wants to create master sets future down the road, or even things like Battle Bond or the conspiracy sets, sometimes they have to get a lot of the equity, especially Commander, from the more recent sets. Now, when you kill cards like Hazoret or Chandra or the Fastlands for the potential foreseeable future, like you'll never see Inspiring Vantage or the Concealed Courtyard be anywhere near the amount that the blue-red lands are worth, just because those were included in a Challenger deck. The Challenger decks have massive supply. They still have massive supply, and right now they just aren't being sold. They aren't being purchased by anyone just because they have very few cards that have any sort of play in Standard or Modern, and therefore the cards like the Virtus Gearhulk is a perfect example. Was just a Standard playable card that no longer has use in the Eternal formats, and has just gone down to nothing. You can see cards like Heart of Cran follow suit. So I think that we will see Challenger decks in about February, and so that's one of the reasons also that I think that now is the time to really sell out of Magic as far as Standard and Modern is concerned, and buy back in once we see the trajectory of growth start to overstretch or even match the amount of products they're putting out. So that is my current plan. Going to the Pro Tour as well, you can see very little change in the market. The Pro Tour was just too little too late. In the past, the Pro Tours have been like week 2.5, week 3 after the set is released, so it's still a new fresh format. And usually there's some innovation at the Pro Tour that then is a trendsetter for the times to come. However, this particular Pro Tour had very little innovation. In fact, the decks were the very reminiscent of just last week's meta. So we see a lot of these red-white aggro. Red-white aggro is the breakout deck from the week before at the Grand Prix circuit. So these are more like white splash experimental frenzy is basically what these lists are. It was taken down by, basically a mirror match. The difference is Louis Scott Vargas was more on a lifelink strategy, and this Andrew Ellenbogen was more on the aggressive with a venerated Loxodon. So both of these are splashing red for Banefires and Experimental Frenzy, and I really want to point out Experimental Frenzy was one of the cards that makes this deck function as a transitional sideboard, as it gives this deck some longevity or some reach is what we like to call it, and same thing with the Johnny Adversary of Tyrant. So I've been going across this deck over and over and over on Arena in the solo queues. Let me point out that this is a pretty terrible deck to be running in if you are looking to do one-game matchups. What makes this deck so good is when it transitions into that transitional sideboard of bringing in Experimental Frenzy into Johnny, and even has access to like Takali Honor Guard, it takes bad matchups and makes them into good matchups. If you run this in like a one-match arena, you're just begging to be shut down by any sort of sweeper effects or any sort of deck that can just go over the top of you, and you don't have that way to push through. So again, this was a meta call, and I'm expecting the market to adjust to this. There have been some cards like the Adonto Vanguard, the Menalish Marshal, that have started to go up in value, especially Legion's Landing. But we have cards like History of Benalia and Experimental Frenzy that are flat. And that is a bad sign for Standard going forward. I think that we finally hit that critical mass of people have their decks. They're not investing in Standard anymore. And we're going to start to see the inevitable crash until Ravnica Allegiance does breathe new life into the format. So, as I've said in, I think 2 weeks ago, the time was probably already to sell off Standard. Now is definitely the time to start selling off in Standard. I think the only things that are going to start moving up in value is just new innovations, and I think those will still stay strong. I think that this is just a 1 week deck. I don't think that red-white aggro is very oppressive. I think it's very easy to beat. In fact, that's what I finally got sick of it. I was trying to play some crazy wacky combo decks on MTG Arena and just kept going against this deck over and over and over again. So I sleeved up the old black-white control and just farmed these decks to oblivion, because you have like a 0% chance of losing to this deck with black-white control. It is just too good. The sweepers are too powerful, and without access for them to go then into the sideboard to pick up things like Experimental Frenzy and Banefire, there's just no reach. The deck has absolutely no reach with the main of this deck. So anyway, let's just look at some of the Pro Tour, the aftermath of the Pro Tour. The number one card out the gate was Adonto Vanguard. It has started to go up in value. A little bit of a humble brag. I did 100% call this Adonto Vanguard as well as the mono white being the deck to beat, and lo and behold, it did perform the best at the Pro Tour, with an exception. The Pro Tours always have a little more skewed data than something like a Grand Prix. A Grand Prix is 100% standard. You just slam standard deck against standard deck for as many rounds as it takes to declare the winner. Pro Tours have 6 matches of draft, and if you actually look at the overall Pro Tour, you can see that the people that made the top 8 were actually pretty good in the draft portion. A couple of these didn't even drop a game, and I think that rode them to being able probably to miss some bad matchups. And I think it was just with all of these red-white aggros that started slamming against each other, and you saw these red-white aggros really pair up against Izzet Drakes a lot. They missed a lot of the matchups that I think are struggling for versus red-white aggro. And if you go down the list, if these people would have just been slightly better at the draft, like the Jeskai controls, Golgari midrange, maybe we would have seen an entirely different top 8 of the Pro Tour. Because if you actually look down in the 8 wins, red-white aggro doesn't even stand out. There's as many mono red aggros, Jeskai controls, Golgari midrange, Izzet Drakes in this. So it still seems like it's a very diverse meta. You have some Boros Angels a little bit lower, and Golgari midrange really, and Izzet Drakes really was on these 7 wins. And below. So those weren't that terrible of performing decks. Again, there are only 10 rounds of standard, and so if you have 7 wins, you won 70% of your games, which is pretty phenomenal. In fact, the only 2 undefeated decks were not the mono white decks; they were Izzet Drakes and mono blue Tempo. So, and then we go down again, and we do have one red white aggro at the 9 wins, and we have another Izzet Drakes. So, if you're looking to see what deck performed the best, yes, it was the red-white aggro. Of course, when you go over here to encompass all of the decks that were included, all the way down to the 6 or better. But it definitely is not a deck that I think is overly oppressive. I don't think we're going to start showing standard go the way of we saw Kaladesh with red-white or red-black vehicles becoming the boogeyman. Before that, it was like a mono-red aggro deck. Before that, it was energy. And then we had Scarab God decks. We had, we had these really, really oppressive tier strategies. I think if you do run into these decks a lot, it's just the lack of innovation that is by the average Magic player. Magic players are more prone, I'd say, than any other. Well, it's gaming in general. I mean, you try to play League of Legends or Dota, you're going to have cookie cutter builds, cookie cutter strategies, and a lot of people with the inability to innovate, or it really takes like a lot of evidence to then persuade people to move over. So I've been having a lot of success versus red-white versus plenty of decks. My zombies deck is just it does not lose to this red white aggro list right now. It will lose like this Lesnie and the Golgari decks, but it does not lose to this. So what I'm trying to say is if this becomes like a huge portion of the meta, it can be very easy to farm, and then we'll see the meta adjust towards that. So we're going to have a meta game, which is awesome for the sustainability of the market. I think that standards are the most healthy when we actually do have a meta game where it is a game to pick which deck to play against which beats what deck and whatnot. And we don't see this. Standard is very, very stale, and prices become extremely stale when there is a deck that has about 30 to 35% of the meta share, and then, it just becomes incredibly, no one's investing in new cards to try to beat it because it's a known solved format. So that's the good news we have for the market. The bad news, however, is just how sluggish the results from the Pro Tour had on the cards. We had the second most played card with History Benalia, not even go anywhere. Like literally not even go anywhere. It actually even fell a little bit right and had a little bit of a bump, but it's still hitting at that $25 mark, mainly because it's in Dominaria. There is no room for Dominaria to go up right now. It still is flat around where the box price is worthwhile to open. And the biggest problem with Dominaria is this is going to be a set that's continued to open for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Whenever there's a $50+ mythic, it is just going to be catnip for all the pack openers to try to crack those Teferis, or even better, those foil Teferis. So there's a lot of room still left to lose from Dominaria. Karn didn't have the greatest showing, still sees some decent amount of play in Standard, but I'm thinking that the Lyra, History Benalia, these type of cards are going to start to go down. We've already started to see some other cards creep up in value. I think cards like the Isolated Chapel still have room to grow. The Benelish Marshal's been creeping up. I highly suggest that you get out of Benelish Marshals because they are in a supplemental product, and there's a lot of value still in that supplemental product in the form of Galtas. I believe this is in the Game Knights deck. This is in the white Game Knights deck, which is about to be released on us. And again, this is just a set that I think a lot of things have to give, and their cards are going to start to go up as far as their ability to be played in Commander over these cards that are now in Standard that is on the trajectory down. So that's kind of what's happening in Standard. We did have some increases in cards like Lava Coil has been ticking up. This is another card that I do believe is in the Guilds of Ravnica kits. I do believe it is. So this might be a card that you could consider getting out of. Card Kingdom had the buy list for higher. It looks like they've lowered it back down. But I think $1.55 out of Guilds of Ravnica for an uncommon is too high at the moment, and we're going to see prices of these start to come down. We still have some limited GPs and limited PTQs that are in the foreseeable future that is going to add supply into the mix. So I still think Dominaria and Guilds of Ravnica have a long ways to go down. This spike was just basically a transition of the market over from Commander, Pauper, Modern over to Standard. Standard was all the hype, and you can see that it's definitely cooling off. I think the History of Benalia is going to be your best market indicator for the health of the format, and if this is a card that cannot go up after the second most played mythic second most played card being a mythic in the Pro Tour, with the single-handed the card that is shutting down Essence Scatter right now, making it miserable for Control because they can't leave up Essence Scatter on turn number 2 and number 3 to guarantee that they counter a creature, because it could be History of Benalia. So if that's a card that is going down in price, yeah, that is bad news for Standard in the foreseeable future. Usually this is what we do see in Standards, though. I mean, you can see Standards of the past, same thing. They come out the gates, and then even if they're played a lot, they still continue to go down after they hit their highs. So I think 25 is probably the high for History of Benalia. I don't think it's going to go much further. The same can be said for the vast majority of cards in Standard. There is still a little bit of room to grow from Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, just because they were sets that were sold dismally. When you see cards like Carnage Tyrant be worth more than History of Benalia, that's just a huge indicator of the weakness of Ixalan versus the strength of Dominaria. Legion's Landing is another card that is starting to creep up. I don't know where the high is of this. I actually think this one probably can hit to where Vraska's Contempt and the Search for Azcanta hit during their heights. Search for Azcanta has a little bit more modern play, so that's why, of course, you're seeing this card see more. But yeah, I believe it's about Legion's Landing could go up to 15. So as far as investments are concerned, that could be the one card that could double up. The it hasn't. I don't believe it's had the box printings. That's about it. I don't believe it's in any supplemental products. These are hard to print just because of the flip aspect. Wizards does not like to print cards without the check card with it. And if they're going to print this in a box set, even in a challenger deck going forward, they're going to have to put a check card for it. So this is one of the more safe cards. I do think that the challenger decks are going to start being produced. So the deck lists are already being compiled right now. And we might just see a mono white as there isn't a lot of reprint equity allowed from the newest set. So if we go back over to red white aggro, this is a card that's rotating, 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 rotating. So what could happen in Wizards could easily, they could cut the red completely out of the list here, create a challenger deck that has about $75 worth of value through the History of Benalius, through the Benos Marshals, dump it on the market in the form of a challenger deck, and this will crash the prices. So for that reason, this is a very easy deck to throw in a challenger deck. February is coming up incredibly quick. I would not touch these cards. I would get rid of these cards as quickly as possible because the best indicator of the future is the past. There will be Challenger Decks 2.0 in my opinion, and these are very, very unsafe cards. I'd even put a Johnny in that list. So speaking of a Johnny, this is a card that I did call, man, this card is being stubborn. I thought that this was the one card that was going to go up in value, that it would follow the kind of the Vraska and the Vivian, when Vraska and Vivian were seeing so much play in the Golgari mid-range deck. And now with mono white, this card saw a ton of play. If we go over to the Pro Tour list here, if we go over to the top spells, okay, it barely does not hit. I believe it is just right down below here. With the cards, the amount of copies, especially in the top 8. I believe that there was, let's just pull up some of these lists. So we saw 3 in Andrew's deck. Lewis's had none. Okay, so LSV did not decide to go like Aurelia in the sideboard rather than the Johnny. So that one did not hit. See some of these others. See Jeremy's, see Tay's, and Casper's. All right, so we had... Nope, just one of Johnny in the sideboard of Jeremy. We had none in none in this one by Tay, and we had 2 in the sideboard. Okay, so it wasn't as highly as I thought it was, but you can see that there's a lot of overlap between all of these decks, kind of using all of them using History Benalia and the Adanto Vanguard. So, yeah. Alrighty, so anyway. That is standard. So you can check out some of these other lists too. Not a lot of movement is at Drake's. We still have the Arclight Phoenix capping out at 25. This is a 4 of in both modern and standard. I'm selling my Arclight Phoenixes. I got it at 250. It was a good payoff. I actually changed all my Arclight Phoenixes into Iconic Masters or Masters 25 boxes the day before Ultimate Masters was dropped on us, so I'm kind of kicking myself for that. But I do think sealed product for the long term is a smart. I don't know. It could continue to go down. It's just something that I think that it does have enough value based on its price point that I thought it was worthwhile to get into. Okay, so let's go on to the other topics of this video. So I think I've shown some evidence that it's probably the best to get out of standard. Look, there's not a lot of movement whatsoever. A 33-cent daily change the week after, or even these weekly changes of just like a little bit of 2s. And Arclight Phoenix is only back up to 2 because it did have like a $2 loss right before. History Now, most played card has a $1.50 move up. That is not good sign for standard going forward. I still say if you want to put your money into the known, that you go into Isolated Chapels, you go into the glacial fortresses. Is that what it's called? All the check lands that have not been paired with a shock land. Those are where I think the best place to put your standard equity is. And then when Ravnica Allegiance comes out, then you can drop them all for a double up and move on to something else. That's the name of the game of finance, is to keep your collection as liquid as possible. Keep moving those cards, sell when they're high, buy when they're low, and don't be stubborn on cards like this. I highly doubt like Vivian can go up to a $50 card, for example. So there are better places to put your money for a double up than a card like Vivian. The only other way that if you want to diversify your kind of your where you've got your commodities, that's a good trade strategy, because if you are a savvy trader and you know you can get a better deal than what your I wanted to say opponent, but that sounds kind of hostile in trading. What your trade partner is looking for. A lot of times you have a very diverse trade. You can say, well, I don't really want your card, but if you want my Vivian, well, I can take some of this equity somewhere else. So you trade me 3 Zakamas for the Vivian. I get a little bit better. I don't need your Zakamas. You need my Vivian, and that's it. It's a decent trade. If they were trying to sell their Zakamas to buy a Vivian, they'd probably be losing out more than if they traded their 3 Zakamas for your Vivian. So you got to use that kind of information to your advantage, and then you go to the next person, the commander player that wants the Zakama, and trade for Vivians. I'll give you 2 Zakamas for a Vivian. I made a killing back in the day when I was in an area, a highly populated area, in this case Salt Lake City, just kind of balancing between the different circles, the commander players, the modern players, the standard players, and recycling their cards between them. I became the market. I became the trade savvy person that would trade up with each one of those groups. There was even a foil collector in that midst where I would get the foils from the standard players, trade to the foil collector for modern cards, trade the modern cards for commander cards, trade the commander cards for standard cards, and rinse and repeat. And you can make a decent chunk of change by doing so if you're in those type of areas. Anyway, getting back to the other topics at hand. We have some pretty ridiculous metrics to go by for this Ultimate Masters. This is so overinflated. I have never seen something so overinflated. If you are paying pre-sale prices for Ultimate Masters cards, if you are paying $80 for engineered explosives, you need to get your head checked, because this is not a card that can hold value. Ultimate Masters seems to be, now that the dust is all settled, I still cannot confirm this, but I'm still not getting any pushback from my distributors. I requested 100 booster boxes of Ultimate Masters, and so far they're like, yeah, we can probably do that, no problem. There's no guarantees on that. I have pre-sold a ton of them to my patrons. One of the things that I do over at my Patreon is I offer distributor pricing if you are a patron. So far, we've maxed out at my 100 allotment. I'm going to continue to allow pre-orders for Ultimate Masters, but we probably are going to have to refund some of these and divvy them out to what's fair. Based upon how long they've been a patron and what level of patron support they have. But anyway, usually in the past, the master sets, I've had pushback. I've had pushback even back when Iconic Masters came out, where it's like, oh, we'll give you 40 right now, but we're not going to give you any more until later on, until we see what else comes out. I've had zero pushback from the distributors. That is a bad sign. I think this is going to be overprinted. I think we're done. I don't think there's going to be a lot of equity left in the Ultimate Masters, because all the mythics have been spoiled. If we come over here to Ultimate Masters, you can count 20 mythics. There are 20 mythics in the set, so we have no more equity coming from the mythics. This is a good list for mythics. It's the best one from a mythic set by far, because all of the mythics there is no junk mythics in this set. When Lord of Extinction is the garbage mythic, that's a good sign. However, a lot of these are very, very overinflated with what prices they are. The ones that I think are going to get hit the hardest are going down the list. The first one is Temporal Manipulation. This card is going to get crushed. The only reason this has any sort of value is this was only in Portal. It had a high Portal number 2, which has very, very low supply. This is just your run-of-the-mill take an extra turn. So it's going to go in some commander decks. It's not legal in a lot of other formats that could, like Modern, that could actually utilize this. And it's just, there's plenty of other take extra turns that do the exact same thing or do a little bit better than this one. Yes, this can go to the graveyard and it can cause a lot of those loops. I get it. That's why they've put these stipulations that you exile the spell once you cast it or you shuffle it back in. And in fact, though, I think that the shuffle back in ended up being worse than just staying in your graveyard for some decks, like in Standard at the moment. However, this is not an $85 card. This card cannot stay at this rate. It is going to get crushed. I think that the next one that's going to get crushed is Caracas. This is another low supply card that was reprinted in Eternal Masters and got crushed, and I think Caracas is going to get hit. It's going to be a double crush. This one I think is going to go down to the $20 mark. Same thing with Dark Depths. This is a card that I do not believe can hold value, even though it does see legacy play. This is the second reprinting within a couple of years because this is from the vaults that wasn't too long ago. This card is going to get crushed. Mana Vault, it doesn't have a lot of specialty printings, but I think it's going to have a hard time for a $50 card to stay here. This card was starting to outstretch. I cannot believe this card went from a $5 to an $18 card within the recent history, but there is a lot of supply from 3rd edition and 4th edition, I believe, that this card was still in. Bitter Blossom, same thing. I don't think that this can hold its value. Vengevine might, because it's still a flavor of the week. All of these Eldrazi, I think, are really going to go down in value and then recover long term, but these are the ones that seem to get hit hard. I think these are going to be very representative of kind of the Praetors out of Iconic, out of Iconic Masters, where you had cards like Sheoldred just get cut in half. You had cards like the Vorniclex and the blue one. The blue one is very highly sought after in Commander, has about the same levels of these ones that they see in Commander. These two cards don't see modern play. It's really Emrakul that's the one that sees the modern play. And these are going to be halved in value as well. I do like these long term, but it's just not sustainable. Leovold, going to get crushed. Mikaeus, going to get crushed. Platinum Imperium, Baleful Dragon, Sigarda, Lord of Extinction, all of these are going to get crushed. So the value, I think, can definitely dry up right now from the $1,600 mark for the equity that we have included right now to the $800 mark. So that makes you think of another set. Another set that came out around like this was the Masters 25. Masters 25 had a lot of good equity when it came out. It could not be sustainable. The one thing that I think Ultimate Masters has going for it is a bunch of these are more iconic / more staples than what we saw in Masters 25. So that's the good news from Ultimate Masters. The bad news, though, is we have no more mythic equity. The rare equity, when they decided to go Stirring Wildwood, Tasker, Lavaclaw Reaches, when they actually started to do this run, makes me think that there's not a lot of rares left in this particular box set that were worth putting as box toppers. And so that's why they decided to include Tassiger, and they decided to include kind of this sort of run. I'd even put like Fulminator Mage and Life and Loam in this category, because remember, Life and Loam was a recent. This set was already designed, and the print was already printed by the time that Life and Loam had that double up. So when they're actually looking at like Life and Loam and Fulminator Mage and Millisome Pulse as particular cards, these had to outclass the other cards that are in this set. So for that reason, yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of value. Now, there could be a lot of value in the common slot. We have Urborg Tomb Yawgmoth. I believe that Couple Coffers will be in this set. I believe it also will be a rare. It'll be upshifted to a rare. So that's going to be able to hold some of its value there. I think we also do have Entomb that was pretty much spoiled as being in this set as a nice little pairing with Reanimate. We could see like cards like Buried Alive. Other cards, though, that are just absolutely ridiculous prices at the moment is Gaddock Teed, Through the Breach, Goro's Vengeance. All of these cards are just so overblown. The whole reason why these cards are worth money to begin with is they have extremely low supply. This printing will be probably higher supply than the standard sets that they existed in, and they are just going to get crushed in value. These two might be able to hold a little bit higher, but the only reason these could hold at this rate, in my opinion, is if they were at the mythic rarity, and they are at the rare rarity, and I think these are going to go way down in price. So that's what I have going for an Ultimate Masters. Now, something else that has been pretty, let's go over here to total format price of Modern. You can see these little price adjustments are just because MTG Goldfish changes these cards that are in what they call the staple prices, and sometimes this data can get skewed. But you can see that from here to here, it did use the same cards. From here to here, it did use the same cards, and you can see that the Modern has been going down in value. Mainly, I would say right from Dominaria or M19. If you click on any one of these staples here, let's do some that haven't had a reprint. Let's go Scalding Tarn, kind of the staple cards. It saw its highest value around M19 and has been going down in value. Scalding Tarn, one of the most played cards in Modern, one of the most played cards in Commander, has been going down since M19. If that doesn't indicate the weakness of the market, I don't know what does. You could say maybe this was an overinflated, but these are the type of trajectories I like. So it flattened out, it hit its low right here at around the $58, right when the Modern Masters was done being open, and has slowly gained 60, 62, 64, 65. This is organic growth from the Scalding Tarn. This is natural supply outstretching the demand. These aren't buyouts. These aren't anything nefarious. These aren't cabals that are buying these out. And then it hit its peak around here, around between Battle Bond and M19, and is then started to go down. So why do we have this decrease in price? To me, it's the focus has gone from the singles market over to the sealed product market. I think people are more willing to put their money in things like Challenger decks, in things like Battle Bond, in things now like Guilds of Ravnica. And when Guilds of Ravnica actually has a lot of where you can open even as a casual player and get a box off of Amazon for $90 shipped, you can open it up and get more value on the secondary market than that what that cost you. And now we have Ultimate Masters coming out, and in this time period too, we also had Iconic, we had Masters 25 that weren't that far off. They were in between this entire time period, and we're finally seeing the market adjust. I also think that enfranchised players have their cards. I think that Magic needs new blood to really justify a growth. To see this again with Scalding Tarn, we need to see an influx of players. Now, I think this Scalding Tarn, if it does not get reprinted in the Ultimate Masters, will start to have growth going back up, because usually when you decrease the price of other cards in the deck, the other cards that do not get reprinted do increase in price, and we start to see that go back up as people are like, oh, I might as well build this deck now that I've got these cards that go in it. I kind of call that the Tarmogoyf effect. It took us all by surprise that Modern Masters 1, when Tarmogoyf was reprinted, it went up, not down. And you'd think that it's like, oh, more copies of Tarmogoyf equaled more, or the more supply would start to outstretch the demand and mean that price goes down. However, the Tarmogoyf effect is that these players would open up a Tarmogoyf and be like, oh, I'm 1/4 the way there to building, having a playset of Tarmogoyf, and it caused them to actually buy playsets rather than, or finish off their playsets rather than sell that Goyf back into the market. So we could be seeing a little bit of that happening. However, I think that was more like a Modern Masters 1 and Modern Masters 2 phenomenon than it is now with Iconic, Masters 25, and the Ultimate Masters. So with the amount of pre-orders that I have received, by far Ultimate Masters that has never been hyped, even out, I think that Modern Masters has outsold what I did for Ultimate Masters has outsold what I've done for Modern Masters 17, which the hype was insanity levels for Modern Masters 17. So I think that there's a finite amount of money, and Wizards needs to learn this. The problem is, and I'm not arguing against it, like I commented a comment on Rudy's video when he was talking about the supply of Ultimate Masters, and I blatantly stated this is not sustainable. Wizards cannot keep doing that. And I had a bunch of weebs, had a bunch of apologists, I don't know, WotC apologists or market deniers is what I like to call it, try to paint me as the bad guy, like that I wanted prices to remain high, that I personally had this agenda. And the whole thing is I was just making an observation. I wasn't saying whether or not this is good for the game, bad for the game, good for players, bad for players, good for anything. I was just making the statement that this is not sustainable. Wizards cannot keep doing these challenger decks, these battle bonds, these Ultimate Masters in such a quick sequence and expect to have equity going forward. If you come over here and we just go over to, if you come over to the prices and just go over to price list, and if you click on just any of these legacy, let's look at legacy for example, and go over to the Scourge all the way back to Mercadian Mass, so pre-reserve list prices, and you start looking at all these cards that are above a certain amount of money, and you can see they all have already seen a reprint. There are very little bits of equity that, like especially like legacy cards, you need them over like $20 if they're going to survive getting cut down to $5. And we can click on any one of these cards, and you can see what happens to them when they get a reprint. So the Seedborn Muse got all the way up to $26. It was a good one to throw in Battle Bond, and look what happened to Battle Bond, down to $6. Went from $27 to $6. And this one is being stubborn. This older art frame is being stubborn at 12, but the real real value of this is probably way low. One of them just sold for $15, huh? That's crazy. You can actually buy it from Amazon or Card Kingdom for even lower than TCG mid price. All the way over to Battle at $6. This was an equity that that Wizards cannot use for a future master set. This is a $27 card from this time period that completely got taken from. Look at something like Insidious Dreams. This is a card that eventually they'll try to throw in, thinking that there's a lot of equity here. When this card does get reprinted, this will be a $2 card. This card will get completely crushed just because Torment is just... One of the problems with a card like Insidious Dreams, too, is this was thrown in bulk bins. It probably got lost around this time period. It didn't hold any value. People are like, it got. What happens when cards get in bulk bins? They get scratched. There are very few near mint copies that survive when people around this time period didn't care about them. This was a nice organic growth from here to here. However, and it had to have a price spike recently because I believe it sees. I don't know. I thought I saw a legacy deck. Or maybe it's Commander. Oh, maybe they threw this in the... I know what's going on. I bet Insidious Dreams got thrown in the Top of Your Library Matters Commander deck. And that's when it went boom to boom. So, yep, that's probably it. Anyway, this is a card that if they were to print in a supplemental product, it would absolutely get crushed. The misleading price of this $10 card from Insidious Dreams is something that has very, very little equity going forward. You can see a lot of these. Mirari's Wake's one of them that does tend to hold its equity, so this is a good one that they can and have reprinted a few times. Commander 17 Conspiracy, and it has been able to hold its value. But Legacy, there's not a lot of them left. If we go down this list, you can see they've already dipped into it. They've already crushed a lot of their ability to. I mean, we have Cobbled Coffers that is still another one that can be reprinted. Diabolical Intent, this is another one they already hit. We do have Meddling Mage, which I do think is really definitely this one could be in the Ultimate Masters. Kind of goes with the theme. I think that Celestia and Azorius are going to have kind of this Hate Bears theme for Ultimate Masters. And Tomb apparently is getting reprinted in Ultimate Masters. I think it was spoiled, but it's getting really, really slim pickings of these really higher value cards. We have like Phyrexian Altar. So the eligible cards post reserve list, we have one card over $30. We still have the Port, but that's still continuing to go down. And this was what? This is Eternal Masters? No, this is Masters 25. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, but this is getting crushed. So here was a $100 card, all the way down to $20. You think Temporal Manipulation is going to be able to hold value when Rashad and Port can't? Yeah, I think that is wishful thinking. So yeah, that's actually a $20 card. There's no more equity left in it. If they were reprinted again, it would just completely crush it. So... Not a lot of cards. This is not sustainable to try to find these box value prices. They're going to have to pick for $5 cards, for $10 cards, rather than for like Patron Wizards. Imagine that this gets reprinted. Absolutely crushed. Time Stretch, this one did get a reprint, didn't it? No, has not. Yeah, they were to redo this one. Same thing. It'd just get crushed. So I'm not trying to be a bad guy here. I'm not trying to say that Wizards should not do this. I'm just saying that from a business standpoint, from their standpoint, they cannot continue to be doing this and expect their sets to sell. There's going to have to be a time where they're going to have to scale back on this if they're going to be able to sell Ultimate Masters type products in the future. And what they either need is they need enfranchised players to somehow be able to have the desire to build more decks than they already currently have. The biggest issue is a lot of the Legacy community, a lot of the Modern community, a lot of the Commander community is having a tough time finding new blood at the moment, and prices are indicating that. We do have another thing called Arena that is absolutely taking focus off of paper Magic and putting money into Arena. There is a finite amount of money that can be spread around the various brands of Magic the Gathering. Now, Magic doesn't care where they don't care if it goes to Arena. They don't care. They actually prefer it goes to Arena or MTGO because it's lower operating costs for them than the paper products. And that's why they continue to push digital over paper. However, they do have the foresight to say that paper is important, that a lot of people only play Magic due to the social aspect or the paper aspect, and I think they will continue to cater to that demographic. Hopefully they will realize it is unfeasible to bring everyone over to digital, and if they're completely owning the paper market, if they're completely obliterating things like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Force of Will, then I think that they should focus on something they're good at rather than try to compete with Artifact or Hearthstone. However, that is another debate for another day. I think I've kind of killed that on this channel. But yeah, playing this whole devil's advocate, playing this whole where I get a bunch of hate, people really just crying in the comments where, I want high prices, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they cannot, logistically speaking, economically speaking, the value has to come from somewhere. They cannot continue to make sets that people are going to buy with such fervor if there is not this sort of crazy value. And now they've set a precedent. Every set that they release after Ultimate Masters is going to look meh. I don't know, meh. I'll wait for something else. And I think that Wizards right now, it's very hard for them to find that perfect set. They either go too strongly one way or have these dismal sets like Iconic Masters and Masters 25. Both of those sets were not horrible sets as far as total value of cards that they put in. Now, when those sets were released, I did give those warnings. I said there is just not enough sustainable equity in these particular cards they chose. Yes, they chose a $50 card here, a $60 card here, a $90 card here. They had low supply. Not high demand, low supply. And if you actually look back at some of those particular sets from Masters 25 and Iconic Masters, Masters 25, it did have some good ones. It did have some sustainability, but Imperial Recruiter, it's a card that got crushed. Rashad and Port got crushed. Even Phyrexian Obliterator, a bunch of these cards, they all completely got crushed because they were more low supply cards than they were high demand. Iconic Masters, same thing. We had, I think that the most expensive card when my Iconic Masters was spoiled was Grove, wasn't it? All the way from an $80 card down to a $12 card, I believe. So let's see. So it was up at one point from Future Sight, $97. Yep. So completely got crushed with the printing of Iconic Masters. So we're going to expect to see the same thing with Ultimate Masters, but even on a larger scale, that it's taking all the money around Christmas time that could have gone into the secondary market of increasing card value and putting it into Ultimate Masters. The entire orders for everything across the board, whether it be card accessories, whether it be guild kits, whether it be even game nights, and nope, no one is buying all of those. Everyone is pooling their money into Ultimate Masters because it's just out-competing the rest of the products on Magic the Gathering. The same can be said about the single market. So, how do we go forward? I know I've gone on this big tirade about this. I think that temporarily, it's in your best interest to sell off the vast majority of singles you are not using. So say Modern, Commander, Legacy, Standard, all those I think is a smart thing. Dump in right now. If you can get ahead, I think it might just be a little too late. It might be too hard to really compete with everyone else is doing the same thing or has been doing that, trying to free up equity to buy Ultimate Masters. And then once the dust settles with Ultimate Masters, then's the time, again, to buy into cards. I'm still a fan of like Iconic Masters and Masters 25 because I think that a lot of these cards will not be reprinted in the foreseeable future just because there's still so much stock available from Iconic Masters. And so cards like Bloodghast that currently are seeing a ton of play in the meta might be a smart investment to throw a lot of money at. I think that this is a card that sees a VAT. Let's just check. Let's go over to Format Staples, see where Bloodghast actually hits in Modern. Third most played creature. Yep. So incredibly played card right now. As a 4 of in the decks that run it in 10% of the decks. This is a smart one to kind of throw it at. But again, this is something you can be very patient at. I think you can have a lot of good deals in buying cards right now as well, which actually makes it kind of dismal to kind of follow my advice to try to move cards for cash to then invest in low cards. Of course, it just doesn't make sense. If you're if you're flooding the market, how are you going to get good prices on things? So anyway, that is where I kind of stand with the economy. I think we're headed to a very bearish market as far as singles are concerned because the focus is digital. The focus is master sets at the moment. And if we see a stale standard, we could see a bull market kind of take off again like we saw in early 2018, where everyone just could not stand standard, and Pauper went up like crazy, Commander went up like crazy, Modern had historic growth, Reserve List went up like crazy. All of those metrics are way down. Reserve List is down, Modern is down, Pauper is way down, and Commander is down. And I think it's really just because of a twofold. Focus going on a digital, threefold. Focus going on a digital, products just being too juicy for people not to buy, and the standard actually being good for once. So anyway, I hope you had some information that this is helpful with your investments. We'll try to do a Market Monday recap of what cards that I'm currently getting into. The thing is, it might just be too similar to what I was talking about last week. This is a slow time. I think there's a lot of, this is more about finding good deals, more of a scattershot approach than a particular going in all in on one card. So what I mean by scattershot, just invest in Magic at a very, very low price point. We're talking about 40 to 50% of market value of cards. Throw it out there, make those offers on the card spheres and the buy lists or your particular communities. Say you're paying this amount. You'd be surprised a lot of people around Christmas time are willing to free up a lot of card value to try to get these shiny new toys that they want to play with. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this. This has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.